Hi, this is Julie from Prairie Point Junction Quilt Shop in Cozad, Nebraska. Thanks so much for joining us today. We're here to showcase our May Saturday sampler session for the Ladies Scrap Basket Quilt. So this is the quilt that we're working on that we started earlier in the year, and each month on the second Saturday of the month we tackle a couple different blocks from that series. We do still have complete kits available for that project if you'd like to join in and sew along with us. We also have just the pattern. Once again, it's called the Ladies Scrap Basket, that you can purchase the pattern and select your own fabrics as well. It's fat quarter friendly, so it would also be easy to sew out of your stash. But the featured blocks that we're working on today, the first one we're going to work on is the 12.5-inch basket block. And that's found on page 6 in your pattern for those of you that are sewing along at home. Now I'm making my demo blocks out of this Mackinac Island line of fabrics. So if you like my demo blocks, I'd recommend the Mackinac Island fabric line from Moda. It's a great classic red, white, and blue look. But the original quilt I've made using the Sarah Scrap Basket fabric line from Moda. So this is the block that we're working on, and those are the fabrics that will be in your kit if you're working on one of our kits. So back to our little demo board here. This block is consisted of many little flying geese, make up the blue areas of the blocks here. And so you'll be taking a square and cutting it into quarters to make the sky, or the goose part of your flying goose, and then you will have some squares that you're going to cut in half to make the background of your flying goose. And so you'll start by putting one of your background triangles right sides together with the body of your goose fabric, stitching a 1/4-inch seam along there, pressing that towards your darker fabric, and then you will do the same on the opposite side with your other little background triangle. You'll position that right along the edge of your goose body, and you'll stitch along that seam. Now before I press those seams open, I like to give it a quick press, and that helps set that seam and prevent any stretching along that bias edge. So after you sew, give it a quick press, and then I also like to trim off this tiny little bunny ear there to get some of that bulk out of the seam allowance. So after I've stitched it, press it, trim your little seam allowance there. You can see I've trimmed it there. And then you'll press that open to the dark. And then you'll sew those 2 flying geese units together. And that makes those units for your block. And then your corners are just made with 2 half-square triangles. So a real simple construction. You're just sewing those 2 triangle pieces together. And so that makes the center section, which really is basically a 9 patch of your block. Now the sides, to get your basket points, are a little bit more of an unusual step, but once again, very simple. You'll have a rectangle, and you're going to add a triangle on each end of that rectangle. So you'll just stitch along there and press that down. Now I pressed it towards my background rectangle. That seemed to be how my triangles like to lay, but that would be totally up to you. So you'll put 1 on each end of that background rectangle, and then sew each of those pieces to the sides of your block, and then sew them to the top and bottom. And then the very last step will be you'll add this triangle piece to the corner of each of your blocks, and that will complete your 12.5-inch basket. So we'll zoom back over here to show you the finished block. So you can see those little rectangle pieces on the side make the bottom of your cute little baskets. And so this block is, to me, a little bit of an optical illusion, because you can definitely see the flying geese make a star in the middle of that block. But if you also look right here, that's a basket block as well. Can you see it on point? There's your basket bottom, and there's your little basket handle or basket points. So it's a little bit of an illusion depending upon the colorations of your block and which fabrics recede and which fabrics come forward. So once again, fabric choices make a great difference in how your block shows up. So that's the first block. And then this is the second block that we're going to be doing. It's the 12.5-inch star flower, and you'll find that on page 9 in your pattern. So some very simple piecing. Once again, we're doing flying geese units, and then a little bit of applique to create our flowers. So we'll come back over here to our demo board. And the block really consists of 3 sets of star flowers. And I think it's tempting if you're someone who doesn't read directions and just dives in. I think it's natural to want to make those 3 individual star flowers and want to sew them together. But you actually need to pay attention to the layout diagram for this block, because you're actually making a bottom section here to applique on, and then another section here, and then a top row and a second row. So don't get carried away and try to sew those 3 sets of stars together first, or you'll have to do a little bit of unsewing. So you're going to make flying geese, just like I demoed in the previous block, where you have your goose body, and then you're adding your triangles on to get your flying geese unit there. And so you'll assemble a row going across with background squares and your flying geese units. And there's actually 2 background squares there, that don't let that trip you up as well. And then the second row is combination of your flying geese and a print square, flying geese, print square, flying geese. And then this bottom unit is, once again, it's the same combination of background squares and flying geese, but you're adding those to a larger background square here, and you're sewing that unit together, and then you're doing your applique on that unit before you sew the rest of the block together. And I like to do my applique in stages, just so I don't have a lot of starting and stopping and places where I have to hide my threads. So I positioned this long section of the stem first, and I did my blanket stitching by machine on that long stem. Then I positioned this curved stem and did my blanket stitching. I fused on this curved stem, did my blanket stitching, and then I positioned both my flowers and the little petals there covered where those pieces intersected. So I didn't have to worry about hiding or finishing off any threads. Pretty much each piece covered the next piece as I went along. And your starting and stopping points here will be joined in your seam allowance, so you don't have to worry about those either. So after you have those appliqued, this last section is also a combination of flying geese and squares. And then you'll sew those 2 units together, and then you'll add on these 2 top rows, and then we'll flash back over again to the finished block, and you have your star flower. And you might notice in this version on the quilt, those flower petals are actually 3 different blue fabrics, and they have the same center. And on my demo board here, I chose to do the same color blue in my flower petals. So that's totally a personal choice, up to you, depending on how much variety you like. This is a more simplified view, and this gives you a little bit more contrast and makes those 3 flowers a little bit more defined. So you can make those your own by your fabric selections. So once again, this was called the Ladies Scrap Basket Pattern. And for those of you that haven't joined us yet, we'd love to have you take part. We have the pattern available, we have kits, and we're glad to help you with fabric selection on that project as well. So once again, this was Julie at Prairie Point Junction Quilt Shop in Cozad, Nebraska. And you can find the patterns and kits that I talked about on our website at prairiepointjunction.com. Thanks for joining us.